Hello, bearded bee people. Are you a reactionary beekeeper? Do you not really have a plan for your bees throughout the entire year? That's fine usually for the first couple of years, but I promise you there's a better way. Stop being a reactionary beekeeper. I'll tell you why and show you how today on Being KBs. My first 4 or 5 years as a beekeeper, I would have considered myself a reactionary beekeeper. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't have any set dates that I thought were good to do any particular things. I just kind of winged it every year.
But what I'd really like to do is something extraordinary.
And the reason that I think that that's a really bad way of doing it is it's tough to assess what you did wrong if you were doing something different for each hive each week and you don't really have the plan that you tried to stick to. So in the first couple of years, I think that it's essential that you are a reactionary beekeeper. I mean, you don't have the experience to build this plan off of. But as you start gaining this experience, it really is advantageous to start coming up with dates and to start figuring out exactly how much time you need for each particular thing that you do throughout the year. Stuff like feeding and treating for mites are really advantageous things to get into a schedule. Obviously, we want to feed to instigate buildup at the beginning of the year, but stop before the nectar's really flowing in. And we want to treat, giving ourselves the opportunity to knock the mite load down before the huge brooded portion of the summer, and also treat after we pull honey boxes off at the end of the year. Figuring out exactly when you're going to do things and how long they're going to take is going to give you the opportunity to get it all done when it needs to get done and be able to move on to your next task when it needs to be addressed. Some of the advantages to having everything on a schedule and working your bees in this systematic way are the fact that you can use all of your resources for a particular job. Whether you're trying to pull splits or create a cell builder, it's best if you can use all of the hives in that yard for this particular job, because of the fact that you can do the same thing to every single colony, and because of the fact that some colonies probably aren't big enough to give off a split by themselves, but they can certainly give a frame or two in the overall plan of pulling splits from a yard of bees. Another big advantage is to have one plan across the board, especially in terms of treating and feeding. It's really advantageous to be able to do that to all of the hives in the yard. You can feed communally because everything's trying to get fed at that one time. You can treat and leave it alone for the amount of time that you need to leave them alone while they're being treated, rather than treating some hives and coming back to work others the next day. It can get really messy in a situation like that. Having a uniform mindset towards your bees also allows for you to cull the stragglers.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
In the beginning of my beekeeping career, aiding and abetting straggling colonies was something I did all the time. Now, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've just started culling them. If they don't fit in line with the plan, if they're not keeping up with the rest of the colonies and aren't ready for this next step, I just spread the resources amongst the other colonies and make up a new split to take their place. There's probably some type of viral or genetic problem that is preventing these bees from doing what you want them to do, and aiding and abetting them throughout that in order to watch them die over the winter is not going to help you as a beekeeper or your bees in that yard. Not treating during the honey season is a really, truly advantageous thing. Obviously, we can talk about the new rules for oxalic acid with honey supers on. That's definitely worth a video in and of itself. But planning your mite year to where you don't really have to be knocking down high mite loads when they're brooded up with honey supers on is the best way to do it. And you can really only do that if you're going about it with a schedule where every single colony gets treated on this particular day, so that every single colony can get honey boxes on this particular day to coincide with the incoming nectar. Having a uniform treatment schedule, as I had briefly mentioned earlier, is so advantageous. I mean, number one, you can blast all of the colonies in a yard. You don't necessarily have to worry about that fact that some are brooded and some need to get blasted and some need formic and some don't have the amount of bees for formic. Having a uniform plan across the board for the entire year will allow for you to have a yard full of colonies that are all ready for whatever it is that you're getting ready for. And it also allows for you to check that box when you're done treating, as opposed to checking 18 of 30 boxes if you're doing it in a haphazard as needed basis. Preventing late season scrambling and emergency purchases are enough reason to create this video in and of itself. And by late season scrambling, I mean colonies that are light, that don't have enough time in the year to get fed properly, and emergency purchases that are required to finish out your honey year or to properly winterize your boxes. If you're going about it in a uniform schedule, the late season scrambling is a non-issue. Like, you've already taken off your honey boxes in the middle or late portion of August and started feeding everything then, with a month and a half left to be able to feed. Now, in the haphazard as needed way, if you were taking off honey boxes as soon as they were ready to be pulled, as opposed to setting a date that you're going to pull all the honey boxes ready or not, then you've got some that are on later than others, and you're likely to be in a scenario where you have to put 50 pounds of sugar on this colony, but you only have a week to do so, and it's questionable fall weather. Every year we have some kind of instance of this late season scrambling. It's not something that I've figured out how to completely do away with, but having plans for treatments and feeding and dates that I want to get these things done by has greatly, greatly reduced the amount of late season scrambles, splits, and purchases that I've had to create over the last 5 years. So, finding out why all that's advantageous is all fine, well, and good, but figuring out how to actually craft this plan is another thing entirely. Now, like I said, if you're a brand new beekeeper, this is something that you're only going to be able to start working on. It's not something that you're going to be able to finish this year or have perfected by the end of next year. You have to figure out some pertinent dates, and you've got to figure out how long it's going to take you to accomplish certain tasks based on the amount of work you're going to put into it, the amount of bees you have, the amount of time you have to get that stuff done. The major points that should be included in this plan are population management, mite treatments, feeding, and honey super removals. Now, once again, this is something that requires a bit of experience to be able to decide on, especially in terms of honey super removal and treating and all that. You really have to figure out exactly when the fall truly starts in terms of bees, when you really, really don't have any time left in the year to be feeding, and at what portion of the year do you think that your winter bees are starting to get created, which would lead you to the correct date as to your late season mite treatment. So to get started on this, regardless of how much experience you have, you should start paying attention and writing down the dates of particular blooms and frosts and freezes, and start asking some local beekeepers when they do certain things, especially spring and fall feeding and their mite schedule. You will want to figure out a good time of year to remove all of the honey boxes from your hives. It's my advice to you that at that time you should implement your late summer mite treatment. I think that that's the best option for a formic treatment if temperatures allow where you're at. You should pay attention to the last week that your bees have absolute, unquestionable flight weather. Flight weather is an important thing to pay attention to, because if the bees aren't flying, they're less likely to be bringing in food, regardless of whether it's inside their hive or out in a communal sense. You really, really do have to figure out when these bees stop flying, when they're turning into that winter cluster mode, and have your fall feeding done before that time. Your late season mite schedule is super important because of the fact that there are way too many instances of people treating their bees too little too late. The main idea when we're treating our colonies is to prevent the disease levels from rising too high, because even if we kill all the mites, if we've got a deformed wing virus level that's incredibly high in that colony, those bees are still going to die. Now, the most important bees in our colony's year in terms of overwintering are our winter bees. These are biologically different bees that have enlarged fat bodies inside their abdomen that allow for them to dispense and consume nutrients throughout the cold of winter. Now, if these bees are diseased during their larval development, you have a much, much lower chance of making it through the winter.
You lose that battle, You lose that battle 9 times out of 10.
So finding out exactly when a lot of experienced beekeepers in your area do their late summer mite treatments is truly advantageous, because you want to get to that before these winter bees are starting to get created inside the hive. For me in the lower peninsula, that's been about August 15th. So you can kind of use that date and adjust it based on where you're at in relation to lower peninsula of Michigan. But it's best to just ask around your local area, find some experienced beak that you truly trust, and figure out exactly what he does and try to amend it to suit your schedule. One of the great advantages to having a plan like this is post-season analysis.
Run through them with a fine-tooth comb, cross the T's and dot the lowercase j's.
It's so tough to figure out what you did wrong if you did something different to every hive every time you were out there throughout the entire bee year. It can be difficult to figure out where things started to go wrong and what you can do differently going forward. If you've got this plan that all of your bees are either fitting into or not fitting into, and then therefore being culled, your plan is much more easily analyzable. So after your first year of following your beekeeping schedule, it can be advantageous to try to generally step back and look at what you think went wrong. In some cases, it's really, really obvious. A few years ago, we had one yard that was left encased in snow into like the mid portion of May. I've mentioned that mistake on this channel a bunch of times before, but my mistake in that regard was not having a yard that was looking south, and they were just in shade for way, way too long of the spring. So those kinds of mistakes are really not the ones that are going to be easily rectifiable based on this beekeeping schedule. But if you started treating at, let's say, September 1, and a lot of your colonies died and had deformed wings, and you're pretty certain mites were a cause, maybe you need to bring that up a couple of weeks to the midpoint of August like I do, and really truly get at those mites before those winter bees are being created. Or maybe you just need to have a more hands-on mite schedule from the start of the year to the end. Either way, in that case, it's pretty easy to amend your schedule to make the correct changes to not have that mistake affect you the next year. If some of your colonies were light going into the winter and you didn't take my advice and take your losses in the fall and combine them, maybe your schedule needs to be amended to start fall feeding earlier, or maybe you need to do fall feeding in a different way where you're feeding individual hives inside the hive as opposed to so much communal stuff. Either way, these dates and these application methods can be changed and amended and put across the board to affect all of your hives so that mistake won't happen the next year. Taking notes and pictures and making regular Facebook posts about your bees can be really helpful in creating this plan and analyzing it and changing it as you learn more. These pieces of evidence or these ideas that you had when you were out in your bees, or what you saw and you took a picture of, can be really, really good pieces of information during these post-year analysis times. So, like I said, ask questions.
Are you saying Pan or Pam?
Find out when some truly successful local beekeepers are doing their particular jobs and try to mimic them to some extent while also trying to do things your own way, because everybody has a different thing that they want out of their bees. Write things down as things happen. A log for specific dates of blooms and frosts and freezes is a great idea. I've never done this. I've said that I'm going to every single year. But over the course of a bunch of different years, I've kind of gotten a pretty good idea as to when things happen. And now, at this point in my career, especially in the fact that I'm about 8 hours north of where I've ever kept bees before, I will be on the lookout for when the maples start blooming early spring. I will be on the lookout for when the bees stop flying in the late portion of the year. And in general, everything else would probably be moved up about a week or two in relation to my lower peninsula schedule. So yeah, like I said, just try to find somebody else's schedule, see when other people are doing things, and try to figure out when it would be optimal for you to take care of those same actions. If you have any questions, maybe you live in Michigan or Wisconsin or somewhere that is easily relatable to my situation, I'd be happy to share my dates with you and answer any questions that you have. Or any question you have about bees or beekeeping, you can leave in the comment section in this video or any other video. I'd be happy to chat with you there. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate the heck out of you being here. If you want to see more videos as they come out in the future, click subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate that. We have a Patreon if you're super inclined to help financially. There's a couple of different tiers of support that you can take part in over there. And if you do that, you can really have some close contact with me and give me some cool ideas for video content and BKB's subject material. So, like I said, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for being here. Get out there and have some fun with your bees. See ya.